We're going to start with some, as I mentioned here, key concepts in vaccine immunology. And one of the challenges when we discuss vaccines for adults is that probably anyone that finished medical school not long ago, vaccinology was something that was not taught for adults. If you were to do pediatrics, then you need to learn your vaccines. If you were to do adults, well, you can skip all related to vaccine because this doesn't apply to me. Then one of the challenges that we have is that some of these key concepts are foreign for most of us as physicians or nurses, I imagine. Then we are going to go step by step. And if we discuss vaccine immunology, every book that you open of vaccines, the question is, when do we start with vaccines? And everything started with we are going to this is going to be the outline of the presentation. Historical background, the host immune response to infection, meaning how is that we as humans respond to infection, and how do we respond to the vaccines. The historical background to vaccination, everything started with Dr. Jenner, 1798. This is the first article published on vaccines. Do you know that the history of vaccination is over and over, but we need to go, we cannot start a vaccine course without discussing Dr. Jenner. This is the publication, the inquiry into the causes and effects of variole vaccine. The first time that the word vaccine and vaccination, and this is a drawing of the two pox that were the problem at that point, the chicken pox and the smallpox. And of course, the smallpox was the big problem. And we know that smallpox was causing severe epidemics, pandemics. And the variola virus, the smallpox, there was question what was the mortality when the smallpox arrived to town. But it was maybe as low as 20%, as high as 40%. But there was a chance that the smallpox arrived and 50% of the population is going to be either dead or severely with abnormalities after the infection. Then it was a big issue of the time. Now, before vaccination with Jenner, we know that historically, even in the thousands of years ago in China and India, they figured out that if a person have smallpox, you were to get pus from the pustules, and with a knife you just scratch the arms or some other areas. This is what's called inoculation. You inoculate. Now we are talking, remember that bacteria was 1800 and virus was in the 1920. We are talking everything, we don't even know what was the cause, but they know that this was bad. You look bad, let me get something bad from you, give it to another person. And then you have a controlled case of a smallpox. And once you have a smallpox, you don't get the disease again. Then these are some figures from China. See the areas that you were supposed to do the inoculation in children or adults. Now, inoculation, given the real virus to a new person, still some person became very sick. And there was a report even of some death, probably 1% death. Then if you inoculated, you have 1% chance of death. If you get the real smallpox through inhalation, and you get dissemination, you have 30-40% death. And this was the standard before Jenner. Now, Jenner realized then that, I'll try to put here, if you have smallpox, you inhale through droplets, you get human smallpox, 30-40% mortality. You get inoculation, you get the scratch with a person with a smallpox. You were protected, and the inoculation, probably you may be sick for a couple of weeks. And Jenner also mentioned in his textbook that as a child, he was inoculated and he was sick for 2 weeks, but then he survived the inoculation, that he was immune to smallpox. Then, if you get the variola virus, this will be a hand of a person with a smallpox. We know severe vesicles all over. Now there were physicians and really the general public with this idea that you were with cows and you milk the cows and you get what's called the cowpox, and this was the hands of a person with cowpox. You get this disease from the cows, and then a smallpox arrived to town. These people were protected. They don't develop smallpox. They didn't know why, but it seems to be that whatever you were getting from the cow was protecting you from the human disease. Then, based on this concept, is that then Jenner was the one to say that instead of giving, I want to get whatever is in the vesicles for this person with human with a cow disease, and I'm going to really do the injection of this, and then this was the concept of vaccination. The idea that I'm going to get a disease from this person that have a mild disease, and I'm going to vaccinate to children and see what happened. Now, this is also from this is all the article from Jenner. This is the article, and this is the hand of the essentially the lady that was milking the cows that have this cowpox in his town, and this is the hands where he got the fluid from the vesicle and started injecting people in town. These 21st cases that he vaccinated. Then he had this the vaccine with the cowpox, and this is also in the same book. These are pictures of a child that he vaccinated, and these are pictures of the child with inoculation. You see, inoculation was the real smallpox virus, that you have a bad reaction, and this was a vaccination. And he proved with these 20 patients that, first of all, they didn't get smallpox. And he also was doing, if there was a person with smallpox, he was doing the inoculation into these people, and they didn't respond. Then essentially, after vaccination, you were immune to a smallpox. And this was a little bit of magic at that point. Then it was inoculation because you get a knife and you just cut the other person. Why it was called, why Jenner decided to come up with this terminology of vaccination? We know that in Latin, cow is vaca, and then from English is vaccine. In Spanish is also vaca, but with only one C is vacuna. But the idea was something that was coming from the cow was very good for us. Then, because this was a cow thing, it was a vaca, then we're giving you vaccination. We are inoculating you with cow stuff that is good. And I may say that this is then the beginning of the vaccine. Then we started with probably one of the most successful vaccines at the time, that I may say that any form of disease was because some problem with the stars, or you have a disease because God you did something wrong, and God is, you have to pay. This was the idea. Remember, that it was not germ theory at this time. But at the same time, when we discuss, when you read about influenza, because at this moment we have a smallpox, we have influenza, we have tuberculosis. They were the great killers. Still, influenza is a great killer. Tuberculosis is a great killer. With influenza was bad air, or was the stars were not aligned properly, and then the influence of the stars were giving you all these diseases. And this is a picture from France, a physician inspecting the cowpox lesion of the milkmaid, because the idea is that you needed to get the milkmaid with the spots to be able to do the vaccination. If you didn't have any person with cowpox, you didn't have vaccine. There was no refrigerator, and there was nothing to keep this. You needed to have the real person to be able to inoculate. Now, another thing that is interesting, talking about what happened today, is that the anti-vaccination movement started with Jenner with the first publication, because the issues at that point was, What's going to happen? Will you inject some animal stuff into humans? Of course, mixing cow and human matter violated natural law. Then you get here. I mean, talking about there were doctors that were get general because they didn't prove safety, and primarily the church, because you're just doing some injecting. Because remember that humans we are not animals, we are superior beings, and then they are the animals. Then you injecting something from the cow into an animal. There was a lot of religious consideration, and then you didn't have Twitter, but vaccine will transform people into cows was the big thing. And we're discussing this the other day, that because we plan to put a history of medicine slides here in our third floor. And I may say this is the first picture that I have of the anti-vaccines. Then because you have here Jenner given the vaccine that all the humans getting cows from the mouth, growing cows from the arms, and having every human transforming into a cow. What is new from vaccination and anti-vaccination? I mean, nothing much changed, because now we advance. We don't give you cows, but we are going to change your genetic material for you to be transformed in some form of non-human being. Then history is a cycle, and this is the historical background. Now, of course, we ended with the smallpox being eliminated as a human disease. The World Health Organization declared this in 1980. The last case of a smallpox in the United States was 1949. The last case of a smallpox in the world was 1977 in Somalia. Then, and of course, one of the advantages here, we can eliminate smallpox, because smallpox, there are not too many infectious diseases that infect only humans. Smallpox is one of these. That is an advantage, because you can vaccinate humans, then you resolve the disease. There are plenty of other viruses that we know happen now with SARS-CoV-2 that is in humans, but it's in animals, then once the virus goes into animals and is all distributed, it's almost impossible to say we are going to eliminate this disease. But the smallpox was eliminated, and none of us have seen a case of smallpox. Now, the disease has been eliminated. As we know, the virus has not been eliminated, because still the United States and Russia has a smallpox. And now with people saying that as technology keep increasing, and now the CDC was able to recreate the influenza pandemic, the Spanish flu virus, other people without so much technology are going to be able to recreate some viruses. And this brings us to the area of bioterrorism and the possibility of new viruses just spread it. But smallpox, we have not seen a case. Now, also to me, as a historical background, to also say that in science, we advance, we retrocede, we advance, because nothing is perfect. Let me tell you another story. And this is the story of the tuberculosis vaccine. Now, again, it's the 19th century. By the end of 1800, Dr. Koch described mycobacterial tuberculosis as the cause of tuberculosis. Now we know that there are bacteria. Now we are able to see in a microscope the bacteria. And the hypothesis was, we know that the cow also have tuberculosis with a Mycobacterium bovis. Then the hypothesis was, look at this cowpox and this is smallpox. If I give whatever is in the cow to a human, the human doesn't get a smallpox. Now there's tuberculosis with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and there are cows with Mycobacterium bovis. What about giving a vaccine with Mycobacterium bovis to humans? At this point, we didn't know that Mycobacterium bovis was as bad as Mycobacterium tuberculosis to cause tuberculosis in humans. But the vaccine trials move on, and then were complete failure, because everybody that got the vaccine got tuberculosis. Then, of course, nothing is 100%. But then we knew that this didn't work. We knew that we needed to do something different, and this was the work done in France by Calmette and Guérin. Then we have a bacille of Calmette and Guérin, the BCG, and the idea was I get the Mycobacterium bovis. Okay, I cannot inject it, but I get the Mycobacterium bovis. I need to decrease the virulence, and after decreasing the virulence, then I can inject it. And to decrease the virulence, there are two. If we want to decrease the virulence of a pathogen, of a human pathogen, we culture the pathogen in non-human cells. Then they keep growing and growing and growing, and every time the pathogen is decreasing the capacity to infect humans. Then this is how do we decrease virulence of pathogens. Now, when they grew this Mycobacterium for 11 years. For 11 years, every year they were, and they injected into animals, got tuberculosis. Another year, injected, got tuberculosis. After 11 years, they injected, no more tuberculosis. Now, all of a sudden, they have something that can inject to humans. Now we are becoming better into safety, because now we know what we're doing. Before, it was totally unknown. Then by 1921, the first human is injected, and we have the BCG. And the BCG, even today, is estimated 100 to 120 million children every year get the BCG. One of the most widely used vaccines. Now, is the BCG a great vaccine? Of course, everybody agrees it's not, but BCG is great to prevent tuberculous meningitis and tuberculous death in children. Then it's a great vaccine to prevent death due to tuberculosis in newborns. Now, once you are adult, the BCG probably doesn't protect us from tuberculosis. Again, and to me, with the BCG, is always, what is the question? Because the question, some people say, oh, BCG doesn't work because it doesn't protect for tuberculosis adults. Well, but this is the wrong question, because the BCG is in the pediatric population to prevent tuberculous meningitis and to prevent death. It's a great vaccine. It all depends what question do we ask for the vaccine. It could be a bad vaccine or a very good vaccine based on the question. Then all these are issues from the historical background of immunology that I think are relevant to whenever we think of vaccines today. Now, for years, vaccination was based on, okay, the human has a disease. Whatever is the pathogen, let me get this pathogen, let me inactivate the pathogen, and then I inject the pathogen to another person. The story of the BCG. Let me get the pathogen, somehow make it less virulent, and then I inject this. We have no idea about the immune system, immunology of anything. We knew that this worked, we didn't know why, okay? And this was the way to develop vaccines. Okay, now we are going to move. How do we understand today what happened when we get a pathogen with a host response in humans and this is 9 o'clock. Okay, I need to be. No, I need to be sure that I haven't till 9 o'clock. Good. Then to put things in perspective, I represent here a virus, a bacteria, and one of our human cells. Bacteria and human cells, you see that we are getting to micrometers. This is, we see this with a microscope. Then we have the microscope, we have a bacteria, we're able to see bacteria. Now, viruses are 100 times smaller than bacteria. And to see viruses, we need to have electron microscope. And this is 1930, 1940. Then we start seeing viruses recently. Now, even though Jenner called the variola virus, I mean, the name of virus in the past was, you are sick, I don't know what happened, you have a virus. This is, then when you read virus in histories, I don't know what's going on, oh, you have a virus. Now, for us, the virus now is this small part. This is why they were discussing the variola virus. It's not, they didn't know that it was a virus. They know that there was something bad with you, and they call it a virus. Then a bacteria is trying to infect a human cells, and we have to have an immune system to prevent us to get infected with bacteria. And the viruses is trying to infect human cells and bacteria. And then we need to also have an immune system to prevent infection with viruses. To put things in perspective, we know a bacteria, when a virus infects a bacteria, you have bacteria probably with 100 virus inside, and the bacteria is still living around with totally infected with viruses. These are called bacteria, the virus that infect bacteria. The viruses are very small. Now, how do I imagine a bacteria or a virus see a human? Well, it's a big cell with several entrances that you have the respiratory, because the human is skin and mucosa. You have the respiratory mucosa, the urinary tract mucosa, the gastrointestinal tract mucosa. And when the virus or bacteria, the first defense of our immune system are the barriers, these cells, and the microbiome, because we know all our surface is covered by bacteria. And this is what we call the human microbiome. Then if the virus or bacteria attach, is going to give us can people imagine that this is the respiratory tract with two lungs, this is the kidney with urinary bladder, and this is the esophagus and the stomach and the small bowels with the rectum. Okay, then this will be everything that a bacteria can attach or a virus can attach. I need to explain my graphic because because this is what I see that bacteria is going to see us, where they're going to attach. Now, all these surfaces, we have the normal flora. We have our microbiome. Now we know that the most common, one of the most common infections is respiratory tract infection, and we know that most of the pandemics that we have for viruses are respiratory viruses and start through the respiratory tract, and we assume that the future pandemics are going to be still viruses that are going to start through the respiratory tract. We were convinced that before COVID, the new pandemic is going to be another influenza virus. That's going to be another virus that's going to go through the respiratory tract. Then, but our immune system that is there to prevent viruses and bacteria to attach and produce infection really have one way to respond. Then when we look at immunology is one immunology for whatever type of infection. Then it doesn't matter if we are discussing a urinary tract, skin and soft tissue, or a respiratory tract infection, the response for our immune system is the same. Then I'm going to just select one infection that is going to be, let's assume that this virus or this bacteria comes down to the respiratory tract through inhalation and is going to cause pneumonia. There's going to be one infection, but all infections are going to be the same. Then if this bacteria is going to go through the lung, this is the GI tract, this normal flora, and the nasopharynx, this is the alveolar normal flora. These always cells, and these are the macrophages, the cells that are circulating. But the others, then there are cells, and it's called innate immune system because we are more with this. Then the acquired immune system is the one that you develop once you are in contact with infections. Then the innate immune system, the macrophages and the dendritic cells are always there, waiting for something, for some virus or bacteria to arrive. The ones that are circulated, neutrophils, monocytes, platelets, natural killer cells. And then we mentioned there is always the surface that in the skin will be the epithelial cells, in the lung will be in the skin, in the lung will be also the cells of the surface. Now the normal flora, and I represent here in this slide, the macrophage are the dendritic cells, they are waiting. And what do they have to recognize virus or bacteria, what is called the pattern recognition receptors. Then the PRP. Every time that you read about innate immune system, these are the receptors that we have that are sensing to see if any foreign microorganisms arrive. Again, these PRP are these genes, these PRP are the one that we get from our parents. Then all human has these receptors. And these receptors have been evolving over thousands of years. Because every time that something new is in the environment, our receptors can figure out what happened. Then, what I try to say here, let's say bacteria, common bacteria arise to the alveoli. In this case, an streptococcus pneumonia. Then, what are our defense mechanisms? As we mentioned, the first one is the normal flora. Always, the first defense mechanism is the normal flora. When someone tries to attach to the skin, there is bacteria in the skin, there is bacteria in the lung, and there is bacteria in the GI tract. And the normal flora, usually the bacterial virus needs to attach to a receptor. The flora is covering the receptors. And the normal flora, whenever someone arrives, they fight these microorganisms. The normal flora produce antibiotics, produce antibacterial, antiviral activity. Now, this normal flora, we learn now, is full of bacteria and we're also full of viruses in our surface. The human microbiome is bacteria, viruses, fungi. Then we have a lot of viruses that we don't even know the names yet that are covering all our surface that are fighting these other viruses that wants to arrive. Then having a normal flora is the first step in having a normal immune system. Hence, every time that we give antibiotics to a patient, we are altering the immune system because we are altering the normal flora. Hence, all the recent data in the literature that giving a lot of antibiotics to patients, as sometimes happens in the hospital, may predispose the patient, for instance, to pneumonia, because we are killing the normal flora in the lung, and then the bacteria are have an easier time to attach. Then the idea that the normal flora is part of us is very important. As a matter of fact, since the relation is difficult to study, but some people say that we look at us as humans, we have more or less from one human cell, we have more or less 100 bacteria living with us. Some people say it's 1,000 to 1, or 100 to 1. And I always mention when I discuss the microbiome, if we are a human having a microbiome, or we are a microbiome carrying a human. Okay, but the point is that the microbiome is very important, it's part of our immune system. Now, the pathogen-associated molecular pattern, this always you read in immunology, PAMs, pathogen-associated molecular pattern. The important thing is that our receptors are not there to recognize an E. coli, a Klebsiella, a pneumococcus, a SARS-CoV-2. No, because this would be too much work. Our receptors are there to recognize some elements of these pathogens that are across all the pathogens. And this is what is called the pathogen-associated molecular pattern. Look at it, what are these? For instance, the lipopolysaccharide. This is the endotoxin of the gram-negative. We know endotoxin is bad. It's one of the worst things of gram-negative. This is what we recognize. Do I have any endotoxin? Now, this may be a Pseudomonas having endotoxin, maybe an Escherichia coli, maybe a Klebsiella. We don't care. Our macrophage doesn't know what the gram-negative. They know that there's endotoxin around and we need to do something. Then the peptidoglycan, the polysaccharide. We know that all bacteria with the capsules are going to have polysaccharide. This glucose from the capsules of the bacteria. Then this is what we recognize. The pathogen recognition, the PRP are going to recognize the polysaccharide. And then, for instance, we recognize the RNA of some viruses or the DNA of some viruses. Another thing that our immune system recognizes is what is called DAM, that is the damage-associated molecular patterns. If a pneumococcus or a virus damage one of our epithelial cells, and the cell dies and get destroyed, a piece of our nucleus of these cells, a piece of the mitochondria is going to be floating around. And our cells are going to say, what is a piece of mitochondria floating around? This is not supposed to be around. Then this is damage that is produced to our cells. Then we recognize this damage-associated molecular patterns or alarming. The point here is that our immune system doesn't get excited for a lot of things. It's only 10 things that we are getting excited that we're going to fight. If it's not one of these 10 things, we just don't care. Because we cannot be fighting for everything. Then it's tomorrow you inhale something that is floating in the air, goes to the lung. The macrophage says, is this endotoxin? Is this? Because otherwise, I just don't care. We are not going to be, because our immune system, as we know, has the good side. We kill bacteria, we kill virus, but have the bad side. We develop autoimmunity. We start damaging our own host. Then our immune system constantly has to be in a balance. And it's better to have our immune system is not very reactive. Because if our immune system goes too reactive, then we have problems. Then what is this balance? This is where our immune system responds only to very limited pathogen-associated molecular patterns. I say this because this is the problem for the vaccines from the very beginning. It's very easy to inject stuff into a human. What is difficult is for the immune system to respond to this stuff. Because most of the time, this immune system doesn't care. Because I don't care that there's a little bit of something in the muscle. You inject something here, I just don't care, because if I don't recognize this as foreign, I'm not going to start developing a reaction. Hence, the concept of adjuvants, that sometimes you need to inject more than the pathogen, try to see if the immune system is going to respond. Then this is the response. We get cytokines, it responds. The white blood cells finally start arriving, the other part of the immune system. The white blood cells arrive to the area, to the lung, to the skin, to the kidney, and then you get the dendritic cells that get excited. And the dendritic cells get all these antigens, and the dendritic cells is the cell that's going to system have to do with the B cells and the T cells and the lymphocytes, the more specialized part of the immune system that one, because they are going to develop the antibodies. But this immune system to the B there's a dendritic cell. Then the B cells are going to respond with antibodies. And the inflammatory response give us the inflammatory response and the systemic inflammatory response. In the kidneys, white blood cells, in the cellulitis is always inflammatory response, circulation and causing tachycardia and fever and increased respiratory rate. There's always the systemic inflammatory. Are very similar because we know that what humans, when we see a patient with a particular infection, 90% of what we respond to infection is always fever, is always tachycardia, is always headache, is always myalgia, because then I need to capture the other 10% to figure out. Bring me to the last part of this presentation is what happens when we give a vaccine. Then, when I give a vaccine, the important thing is that when I inject this antigen, is supposed to look like a pathogen-associated molecular pattern. We know why, because these are the patterns that our immune system is going to respond. Then I give the injection in the muscle. It's going to be a local inflammatory response. The dendritic cells that are there are critical. It's going to be macrophage because the dendritic cells are going to capture this antigen. And because these antigens, what happened is that the antigen needs to be captured for the cells, needs to be processed, and needs to be presented. And what for the B cells, T cells, the antigen needs to be presented. Someone needs to do the work to present. And this is the dendritic cell. This is why the dendritic cell is the prima donna or this vaccinology. What happened with the dendritic cell? Here I have, this is what happened is the antigen, for instance, normally is the antigen exogenous antigen. This were to be a bacteria, let's say a pneumococcus. Pneumococcus get by the dendritic cell, get into the lysosome, and is destroyed into this small peptide. This is always protein, small peptides. And these peptides are attached to what is called the major histocompatibility complex, class 2 proteins. And when the antigens are presented to the T cells, they are supposed to be presented a foreign antigen and my own antigen, foreign and self. And this self is also the complex, the MHC complex. Then whenever you read that the presentation of antigens happen with one of our own protein is the major histocompatibility complex. Then here what you have here is the representation of this dendritic cell presenting the non-self, that would be the yellow, that belongs to a pneumococcus, and the self, that would be the red, that is one of our own proteins. Now, there's another consideration, is that sometimes the antigen is inside of the cell. A virus multiply inside of the cell. Then you still have the peptide. You have a piece of protein for the virus that is foreign, but now there's a different type of proteins that get attached. Still major histocompatibility complex, but type 1. Then you have our self and the foreign. This is a way to present this. Now, these are all protein antigens. Whenever you have a protein antigen, you get the peptide that is, antigens are amino acid, peptide is a couple of 10, 15 amino acids that you present with some of our amino acids. Then our immune system said, this is foreign, this is me, I'm going to respond. There's another possibility that you get an antigen that is not a protein. The antigen is, for instance, a sugar. It's a polysaccharide. Well, the dendritic cells don't pay too much attention to, if this is not a protein, we just don't care too much. Our T cells are not going to care this is not a protein. Now, if this is a polysaccharide, still is going to be presented, but it's not going to be presented attached to one of our proteins. It's going to be presented by itself. Again, this idea that we don't want an immune system that's going to over-respond to prevent autoimmunity. Then the dendritic cell captures the antigen, is doing all this work, and the dendritic cell is going to get and bring all these antigens through the lymph node or to the spleen, where the T cells are located and the B cells are located. The dendritic cell get from the injection into the lymph node. This is why when you get a vaccine, just you get some redness here and swelling here, because these are the lymph nodes that the dendritic cells are working. If this antigen is a polysaccharide, meaning that the antigen is not presented with one of our major histocompatibility complex proteins. That's presented by itself. The B cells are going to be activated. The B cells are going to move into plasma cells, and the plasma cells are going to produce antibodies. And the antibodies are immunoglobulins, and the immunoglobulins could be IgG, IgA, or IgM. This will be a dendritic cell arriving to the lymph node with a non-protein antigen. Now we mentioned, what about if this is a protein antigen? Well, it can be presented, if this protein antigen is from an extracellular pathogen, it's going to be presented with a class 2 antigen, and now the T helper cells are going to be activated. And when the T helper cells are activated, there are cytokines. We have a better activity for the B cells, and we express here there was just plasma cells, here is plasma cells with memory B cells. And the memory B cells are going to go to the bone marrow and going to have a better response. And what happens if we have an intracellular pathogen? This is then the class 1 antigen presentation. Now we have activation of the CD8 cells. And now we have the T cytotoxic cells that are activated. And not only this, we have also memory T cells. And this will be the full spectrum of our immune response to antigens. And this explains what we see with why the polysaccharide vaccines that activate only B cells and plasma cells, the way to resolve the problem that the dendritic cells do not respond very well is attach or conjugate the polysaccharide with a protein to be sure that our immune system recognizes that it's a protein, a foreign protein. And since one of the most serious diseases for humans is diphtheria, then usually the conjugation happens with a diphtheria toxin because this is a protein that our immune system tends to respond very well. Then this is the idea of the conjugation with vaccines, trying to trick the immune system that something more serious is happening. And this is the conjugation as well as the adjuvants. Then with the vaccine, you're going to have a local inflammatory response and the systemic inflammatory response. Now, we always discuss with Ruth that you study a vaccine, and this from the happen naturally, it cannot be an adverse event. By definition, adverse event is something when something that was unexpected happened. Do research. Now, if an event is expected as part of we give a vaccine to a person, and I'm going to give you this vaccine. If tomorrow you have fever, this is great because this means that your immune system really this year feel nothing.
Oh,
I'm thinking to myself, in the muscle, something is wrong. You're not having. I got zero inflammatory response to my. I got my shot, and I went to, and after several hours, I was, what happened? Tomorrow I go to employee health. I have some arm pain. Oh, this is an adverse event. It's not an adverse event. It's my dendritic cells, my white blood cells that are responding to this foreign antigen. And this is, then we don't see this as adverse events is what happened. No, you have a clot after vaccination, or you have Guillain-Barré after vaccination, because this is the immune system that when responding in an inappropriate way. The immune system activated our, the inflammation was so bad, now activated the clot system. And now I have clots, and the person developed a pulmonary embolism. Now, this is definitely an adverse event. But it's not just some fever, myalgias, and some pain at the local area, because this is part of the immune response. Then, another thing that the immune response, we know that for infections, it's different to have a pneumonia if you have you're a normal host, if you have pneumonia, if you have congestive heart failure, if you have pneumonia, if you're on cancer chemotherapy, because you have a host with a normal immune system, abnormal immune system, or immunocompromised. This is a decrease. Well, the same happened for vaccines. I mean, it's not a mystery. And the same way that we don't respond to the real thing, if our immune system is abnormal, it's impossible to expect that a vaccine is going to have a good response when your immune system doesn't respond even to the real pathogen when we're given an artificial pathogen. Then when we look at how vaccines respond, we need to consider that sometimes here I put the list of different outcomes. I want to discuss this future because in pediatrics, I always mention pediatrics vaccines are a little bit of magic. You give the vaccine, the child doesn't get the infection. It's almost, you are completely protected. In adults, it would be unrealistic to believe that in adults, vaccines are going to completely prevent disease, when in reality, you have people with normal immune system or normal immune system, immunocompromised, they have the full gamma. Then you get the vaccine to a normal host. Sometimes the vaccine may prevent even infection. This is the ideal situation. You get the flu vaccine, and the flu virus is around, and the flu virus cannot even attach to my nose because I have even the immunoglobulin A that is in the mucosas. I have antibodies in my mucosa. Sometimes we learn with the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, you get the vaccine, but you can still get the virus in your oropharynx. You may be asymptomatic, but you have infection without disease. Now, we also learned that people can get disease, but you don't get severe disease. Then, yes, I get influenza, I don't get influenza pneumonia. Then I'm protected. But even if you get disease, there is also the protection, the consideration of poor outcomes. Then, yes, you get pneumonia, but you don't go to the unit. When you get pneumonia, you don't go to the, you don't die. And this has been, when people say, well, this has been our storyline for the last 30 years. When we started, I always say, when we started with all our vaccines are getting better. But 30 years ago, our flu vaccines were very bad. I mean, I don't want to say were not as effective. All the vaccines were not as effective as now. They're saying that 30 years ago, we're discussing the only vaccines that we have for encapsulated bacteria were polysaccharide vaccines. Were polysaccharide vaccine for pneumococcal, for meningococcus, for Haemophilus influenza. Well, and we have studies that the polysaccharide vaccine, even for the vaccines today, for the pneumococcal vaccine, you still can get pneumonia. You get pneumococcal vaccine, but the idea is that you didn't die of the pneumonia. Then it's a mistake to me in adults to give a vaccine to an adult. I say, I give you this vaccine for you not to get the disease, because then I have every year thousands of veterans complaining to me every time that I'm going to see a veteran admitted with pneumonia. They say, I don't know why you say that I have influenza because I have my flu shot. Then the flu shot doesn't work. Why getting the flu shot? Because someone mentioned to the veteran, I'm going to give you the flu shot for you not to get influenza. Wrong message. I give you the flu shot for you not to get a bad flu, for you not to die of influenza. Not for you not, because every winter, most of the patients admitted to the hospital with a positive flu test, 50% have the flu vaccine. Is this a failure of the flu vaccine? No. Because the immune system is responsive. And then, of course, if the person is immunocompromised, we are going to discuss, it may be a failure of the vaccine because you don't have immune system, you don't respond. Then it's my 45 minutes, then I give you a very brief review of the historical background of vaccinology, starting always with the first vaccine, thanks to the cowpox, the host immune response to infections, and then a little bit of how vaccines have a difficult time to be sure that our immune system responds to a vaccine and produce proper amount of antibodies.